All right, so what we have here is we have the emergence of mass culture during the 20th century. And we're also going to address new wave feminism that is going to begin ramping up. And we are going to then see how that builds toward World War I and then obviously World War II. So the Victorian era that we talked about yesterday really saw the emergence of really the first modern industrial mass societies or mass cultures, okay? And one of the characteristics of these industrial societies, above and beyond, is industrial technology and the use of fossil fuels, and that is what's going to allow the culture of this time frame to really become mass produced. And I think when we think about those two things today, technology and fossil fuel usage, there's a number of things that we can't really think how life would work without that, right? Some of our major technological innovations, and particularly fossil fuels, what would life look like if we were not using those two major things? For instance, just everybody in here looking at the clothes that we're all wearing. We're wearing uniforms, so everybody pretty much has the same mass-produced items in large part. But even beyond that, everybody has Nike and Adidas and Under Armour, and all of these things are mass-produced, and we all share those things, and that's kind of part of our culture, okay, that we all share. Same thing with like vehicles, yes, there's countless number of vehicle companies, but the vast majority of them are Ford, Chevy, Dodge, Honda, Toyota. That would be a Ford.
Have you heard the song about the
Yes. And so you get to the point where there's this vast culture being produced and is being brought about by the changes of industry. And we also end up with lots of written materials in the form of books, which had been fairly expensive. Yeah, books were cheaper than they were, in the 1300s. But books are still pretty expensive. Printing presses are not, up to that point, they were still not like automated, or mechanized. And so now you're going to have mass-produced books that are way, way cheaper. You're going to have newspapers printed in even large numbers, cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And then by the time we get to the internet in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we get the mass consumption of cultural items like memes and TikTok videos and Snapchat, and we can share all these things instantly. And so we go from living in villages and tribes and our own rural group to all of a sudden being connected worldwide with a single culture, a single society in a lot of ways, which is kind of weird because now that we're connected more than we ever have been, and looking at today's society, it's very strange that we are less alone, quote unquote alone, than we've ever been in society, and yet people are more depressed and anxious than they've ever been in the history of humankind. Suicide rates are going through the roof. People are feeling left out of society. People are shooting other people at an alarming rate. And we always thought, well, those are the people that are cast out of society. And now those people, society is everywhere. Everybody's included, and yet those numbers are going up. So I think that's an interesting thing to kind of look at, in a way. But there's two things that we're going to talk about, which is literacy and consumerism, and we're going to talk about those as we kind of go through here. Now, materialistic mass culture really quickly is a set-up belief. It's the set of beliefs that dominate in a society at any given point in time, okay? And it's things that we share in common. And so we've been talking about the Victorian era, and their desire for security over the lower classes and their feeling of superiority. And these are their beliefs, right? And if we want to talk about today, we might, talk about being tolerant, or we might even talk about, the rest of the world and, how We've all kind of come together into more of a global culture. But at that point in time, kind of the mass culture revolved around elites keeping down the poor. Okay? And so realistically, how does this happen? Again, we said it's really the byproduct of the Industrial Revolution, which we talked about in the last module. Well, let's talk about these two overarching points here. And that literacy and education mass literacy and education is really one of the major causes, and also consumerism. So in the 19th century, you see an increase, particularly in Europe. So let's look at France. So we see that there's a literacy just below 50% at the start of the French Revolution in 1789. Okay? By 1870, it's almost 80%. And then basically by 1900, 100% of French people can read and write. That is a huge increase. Female literacy is actually pretty close behind that as well, with just, and that has everything to do with, the printing of things in the vernacular, meaning like the language that you read is the same that you speak, right? That your spoken language and your written language are the same, right? So we write words in English with the same sounds that we sound them out as we speak. That's not always the case. People would speak French but write in Latin. You get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? That before that, so even if you could speak French, you may not be able to read and write because you don't speak Latin. But now, they have started, basically everybody has started to say, hey, if you speak French, we're going to also write in French, which means that it's a lot easier for people to be able to read and write in their own language, okay? And that really started at this point in time. In France, they also start to educate people with free education, free public education. This really happens under the Third Republic. And they say, hey, free primary school. And not only free, but kind of mandatory. They kind of invent the idea of mandatory primary school, which, if you think about it, is really a smart way for a government to control their people. If you really think about it, public education was actually kind of invented in order to make sure that people were patriotic. It wasn't like, oh, we need everybody to be able to read. They were like, oh, we need everybody to be able to read how great the country is. Like, it's kind of a ploy to some extent. But if everybody's reading the same things and getting the same education, then we're going to be able to push forward some agendas and share our cultural values like nationalism. We're going to be able to tell the kids, hey, we're going to make them stand up at the beginning of every day and say a pledge to the flag. And that reminds them that every day should start with them remembering how great it is to be French, right? Why do you think we say the Pledge of Allegiance every day in school? So that you will all be good Americans and know how great America is, because every day starts with the pledge. It's a manipulation of education. We call that hidden curriculum in sociological terms. Yeah, hidden curriculum is that we're teaching you to be good Americans, and you didn't even know it. Ha ha. But, it also helped with, you have the ability to, once you can read and write, now everybody wants something to read and write. Good news is we can print things for them now because it's a lot faster. And people are going to be interested in reading and writing. And this is going to make the printing press very, very important. And innovations are going to take place. That basically means that the culture is going to move forward because everybody's going to be reading the same kind of information. Secondly, you have consumerism, just the idea that people are going to start purchasing goods at a higher rate. And it's kind of a perfect cycle of what's going on because the buying power of the average person increases, which then increases the ability of a company to hire more people because they're making more profits, which then puts more money into the pockets of people, which then spend that money on the companies that can then hire more people, which then puts more money in the hands of people, which means that they can hire more people, which puts money in the hands of people, and this is how economies continue to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And from 1850 to 1900, the average French personal purchasing power, say that 3 times fast, French personal purchasing power. Yeah, you didn't even say it once right. It increased by 165%. That means that if you made $100 this year, that within that time span, your $100 turns into $265, right? Like a great deal of increase. This is happening all throughout Western Europe, Britain, Germany, and then the United States, and they're going to increase the ability of average people to afford commodities that are above and beyond what they just need to survive. And ultimately based this on the energy that is unleashed by the Industrial Revolution. Again, things are mass-produced, cheaper, there's more jobs, people are working, spending more money, getting things that they want, better quality of life, and this is what's going to create this idea of everybody buying the same types of things, okay? Like the Henry Ford Model T. Everybody bought a Model T. It was a piece of mass culture because everybody bought one. And they all looked the same. They all shared the same culture. Now, it's not all good news, though, at this time period. We also have the advent of what's called yellow journalism, which, as a result of the cheapening of print and the rise of buying power, yellow journalism emerged with the sensationalized accounts of political events. And they stretched the truth in order to sell copies, so they might lie or say something wrong in order to just sell papers. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Like, what do we call that now? No. Think, okay, not just fake news, though. They sensationalize. So on the front page of the paper, they sensationalize the title of the articles and put it big and bold in order for you to come up and buy it. Now in the digital age, we call that clickbait. Yeah, clickbait. Okay? Like they basically, it was the newspaper version of clickbait. It's basically like every newspaper around was like those ones that you buy at the register that are like, Tom Cruise's experience with an alien. Like those weird papers, the National Enquirer or whatever it is. Yeah, and so we have fake news, and it really shapes political discussion, and the way the media covers things. It's definitely nothing new. It's not what we're dealing with today. Is not the first time we've had to deal with this. So, anyways, this idea actually goes all the way back to the times in France. You had this sensationalized account. La Petite Journal, or whatever you call it in French. I don't speak French, and I think it's a ridiculous language that I don't understand. Journal. They basically would go out and cultivate scandal. It's the idea that you have journalists that are going to go around digging and trying to find stuff, and if they can't find anything, they'll make it up just to sell papers. And that's actually going to cause, like he says right here, actually one of the causes of World War I is this idea of like, we have to sensationalize things and make them seem more important than they are. And we're going to blow everything up and not blow it up like literally, but like we're going to explode the story. All right. And it's kind of crazy how this actually ends up happening. And there's some serious consequences of this, right? Like we had this major polarization between, but there are dangerous to this idea of yellow journalism because typically people want to read things that they agree with, and then it ends up being an echo chamber, and then it can eventually come crumbling down, and it's a very dangerous thing where you're just reading sensationalized accounts to get you riled up, and then you want to go find more stuff that's going to rile you up, and then you're just all riled up. Now, if we return to consumerism here, there's also the advent of department stores. Okay, and you see a kind of seismic shift in the sphere of acquisition and how you acquire goods. And just stop and think about how you acquire goods, most of the goods you get today. There's really two ways at this point. You could take out your credit card, and you might have a chip in it, or you swipe it or whatever, and then you leave out of the store with your stuff. Or you go to Amazon, and you type some stuff in, and you hit click, and then it sends it to you, right? That really began here with consumerism. And so basically, Amazon's just a big online department store. But in the early modern era, in the Victorian era, just after luxury goods were basically, before that, luxury goods were just for the rich people and the nobility and the upper levels of society. And because they were hard to make. But now, things are getting cheaper, and because we're mass producing them so much faster, and what used to take, an hour to make a t-shirt now takes 10 seconds. So I've got people making t-shirts all day long. Now I've got all of these surplus of them. I'm like, well, where am I going to sell these at? Oh, maybe we should have a store that sells a lot of different stuff. And now this begins to really kind of take hold with the idea of department stores. They also are going to fix the prices and then compete with each other. Each department store, things are going to go on sales and stuff like that, try and get you in the door. Doorbusters. Yeah, what?
Never heard doorbusters.
Yeah, bro. It's because people bust down the door to get those sales, man. And now, yeah, you just... What? Like before this time, like people would have, you might have like 3 shirts for years. You just have 3 shirts. And if something happened to them, you'd take them to a tailor and have them patched up because it was cheaper to put a patch in it than to go buy a new shirt, because a new shirt might be $20, or maybe $10 or $5, and you only make $100 a year. So like 1/20th of your pay for the year would go into buying a new shirt. Now you can get a shirt for 5 cents. So instead of, and so now you also have the idea of like, oh, I have all this extra money because I can buy what I need and I'm not broke buying what I need. What do I do with this extra money? Oh, I could save it. What? Savings? What is that? Like, or I could spend it on like alcohol or drugs, and that's mostly what they did with it. But yeah, it was pretty crazy. But they start buying all different kinds of things. Bedroom sets, curtains, all different kinds of textiles were much, much cheaper. Instead of having things repaired, they just throw them out and buy new ones because they could afford to now. And so it's really a big innovation. This is the, how do you say this? Bon Marché. This was the Bon Marché in Paris. It was the first real department store. It was built in the 1840s. It went through some expansions until it basically occupied an entire city block by 1906. It employed 4,500 people. I don't believe so. And during the 1880s, during the 1880s, it actually would see somewhere around 10,000 shoppers per day. Yeah, in the 1880s. And up to 70,000 like every February, they would have a sale called a white sale.
What about the Black Friday?
I'm getting there, bro.
You just said the white sale, man.
It's called the white sale. They would sell sheets, like linen sheets for reduced prices, and 70,000 people would show up to buy sheets. Now, Black Friday is not that, there's a whole different reason it's called Black Friday. It's not because of anything else other than, which some people in the recent days have been like, we need to quit calling it Black Friday because it's racist. It's like that, everything's not racist, okay? What? It is stupid because Black Friday got its name because it was a day in which they would sell stuff at such a reduced price that if a store was having a really bad year, it would be known as being in the red, that you're losing money. And so they would say, we're going to have a sale on everything. We're going to advertise it, and we're going to sell so much stuff that it's going to put us into the black. We're going to do this on a Friday in November after Thanksgiving. And even if we've had a terrible year, by the end of the year, when we get to the end of November, we're going to have a sale on Friday that's going to put us into the black, which is how it became known as a Black Friday sale, because that's the day we're going to sell so much we end up in the black instead of being in the red. Learn something every day from Coach Redmond. All right? Now, yeah. So anyways, this mass consumerism really hinged on everybody buying goods that you didn't need. You don't really need new sheets, but they're on sale, so we're going to buy them. My wife is obsessed with this. I don't know why. She's like, I'm going to go to JCPenney's. They're having a good sale. And then I'm like, okay. And she's like, I got a really good deal on these pants. And I was like, okay, cool. But did you need pants? No, not really, but they were on sale. I mean, I was like, you know what, though? She's like, we saved a lot of money. I was like, but you didn't need the pants. So we didn't save money. You spent money for things you didn't need, which is the opposite of saving money. But that's the whole idea behind consumerism. We buy things that we don't actually need. You could get by with like 3 sets of clothes if you had to. You really could. Most of you are done growing, so the clothes you have now, you can basically make those last forever. Okay? We also are going to have some major scientific improvements and stuff like that that are going to go on. Mass culture is also going to include art and writing and music and other forms of entertainment. We also can talk about sports becoming part of mass culture because that is really developing around the 1900s. All of these things, again, are part of the mass culture. And really sports are actually a really terrific example of mass culture because they do huge business, they do huge ratings. People wear clothing with their logos on it. It's a culture that a mass of people can share. And if you like a certain team and then you walk into a store and someone's wearing that team's clothing and you're like, you kind of give them one of those like, hey, I like them too, right? Like it happens. I'm just saying, like you do. If you were traveling and you found somebody in another state that was wearing an LSU shirt, you might be like, hey, you from Louisiana, right? Like it's a culture thing that people share and people identify with each other, and it helps you cross boundaries that maybe you wouldn't have crossed otherwise. And plus, baseball is big business. Sports in general, they're owned by billionaires who pay millionaires. And it kind of is just one of those things that are built into our culture. Another thing that we start to see is the first movies that are going to come out. We also see concerts and orchestras and choirs and stuff like that become bigger forms of entertainment. It's during this time frame that you have the revival of the Olympics into what we now think of as the modern Olympiad, right? They had gone away for a really long time, and then sometime around the late 1800s, early 1900s, they start going, hey, we should start doing that Olympics thing again. That was cool.
So America started that?
No.
America.
This is just the world, all kind of this mass culture, because remember, everything's kind of shrinking at this point. Everybody, Europe and America, it's all catching on because the Industrial Revolution has spread to most of the civilized countries at the time. But again, you end up with music and movies and hundreds of different genres and stuff like that. And it's all tied into being a part of this mass culture that's developing. With the rise of mass culture, and we're going to end with this kind of slide, and then maybe one more slide here. Nope, this is the last one here. It kind of gives you a cause and effect. This is a really, really good slide for maybe some short response questions to come from, or like an essay. Like this slide might be very, very beneficial to you on writing an essay for an exam. You can see here, public education is the cause. The effect, literacy goes up, mass market for books and newspapers. So as investment in public education happens, literacy is going to go up. There's going to be more people that want to read stuff, so we're going to make more money selling books and paper. As we improve communication, publications are going to become cheaper and more accessible, and then we get a mass market for books and newspapers again. The invention of the phonograph and records, more music directly into people's homes, rise in demand for musical entertainment. Shorter work day, 10 hours, plus a shorter work week, 5.5 days, means more leisure time, which means there's going to be a demand for more entertainment, right? So you can see how some of these things are going to really push everything forward and push culture forward. And unfortunately, like in the third lecture, we're going to talk about feminism and new wave feminism and women's rights and some of that stuff and some of the negative effects that are going to go on as well, like the anti-Semitism that's going to come out of this time frame and stuff like that. So we will pick back up there tomorrow.